You're live.
That's the second week in a row. We're live. This is the problem with having a screen on that side. Welcome. We're glad you're joining us tonight. And we are here for this is now the fourth in this little series we're doing on resolving identity crisis. And tonight, talking about the desire for acceptance. I just want to, encourage you again before we jump in here, just to ask questions and to really allow I can speak from experience. It's very easy to sit and listen, and I have the same tendency when we're in men's meetings and we do men's classes and stuff like that, and we'll have Q&As at the end, or we're doing one Sunday mornings where it's kind of open forum. We're talking about a topic, but there's an open question forum, and I find myself sometimes just drifting into thinking about what we're talking about, not as much about how does this apply to me? What are things I struggle with in this? What are questions I might have, or even what are some questions that that have come up in conversation recently and might actually be engaging for the people that we're with. And so my point in saying all that is that asking questions is something it's a skill you can develop, and so join me in developing that skill tonight. And I challenge you to really think about what we're talking about from the standpoint of how it applies to you, and let it engage questions, because talking specifically about the desire for acceptance, and to be fair, I know some of the stuff we've covered in the last couple top podcasts might have been a bit tough to really come up with a ton of questions, but I think that, again, this idea of identity crisis is a very current issue in our world, and something I think is everybody, whether you're a believer or non-believer, is going to see or face or is dealing with on your own. And so like I said before we jump in, keep this stuff in mind when we're talking about it, and challenge yourself to ask questions. So you can do that in the chat box. You can also do it in the comment section if you're watching this after our live broadcast. And let's go ahead and jump right in. So we were leaving. We do an outreach every weekend, every Friday night right now, especially during the warm, extremely warm days we're having, which is great for people to be out and about, and we get a lot of opportunity to talk to people. And last week we left downtown Redwood City, and I had my daughter Adriana with me, who's my oldest, and she told me, she said, I noticed, and she's just kind of just something she just noticed and decided to talk about, and she said, I noticed that there's a lot of young girls that hang out with young guys that all have their pants kind of down, below their waist, and they're like saggy and baggy like that. And I said, yeah, that's true. That's totally true. It's interesting that you observe that. And I said, what you're looking at is you're looking at girls who want to be accepted by guys they think are cool. And I said, and guys do the same thing. I said, the reason why those guys sag their pants is because they want to be accepted by other people they think are cool. I said, it's the idea of acceptance. And so I had already chose this topic, and so it engaged a conversation between me and my daughter about the idea of being accepted, and specifically for, as it related to her, about what it means to desire acceptance. And so I was thinking about that issue of acceptance, and easily the scripture in Genesis 4, and we've talked about it quite a bit. When you think about human nature, going back to the book of Genesis is very helpful for understanding why people do what they do, and a lot of who we are today is started in the Genesis story. And one of them about Cain and Abel. So Cain and Abel come and they bring God this offering, and Abel brings an offering of a baby lamb, which was the best of his flock. He brings it, or the first of his flock, and he brings it, and God accepts his offering. And then Cain comes and brings an offering of the fruit of the ground, and God doesn't accept it. And so the Bible talks about how Cain basically he's distraught about this. God comes to him and says, "Why has your countenance fallen?" And then he makes this statement: "If you do well," or another translation says, "If you do what is right, will you not be accepted?" Yeah. And he says, "But if you refuse to do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, and its desires for you, but you should rule over it, or you should master it." So we have this picture of acceptance in the Bible, and it's actually the first time acceptance is mentioned in the Bible. So we have the origin of acceptance. And so the first thing we see is that this was clearly something man wanted. Otherwise, God wouldn't have even addressed the issue for acceptance.
Yeah.
So I have a question for the audience real quick, of what does it mean to be accepted? And I'm gonna pose that in the chat here. And then while that's being answered by the listener, I was thinking about this. Maybe we could split it into two. Thinking about it from the standpoint of children or young, we could just call it younger people, because I think your formative years are up to what? I think it's like 16, 17 or something like that. Those are your most formative years from the age of, I think it's 9 to 17, isn't that? Do you remember any of that? From all the books
it's a little vague. It's not easy to nail it down.
So we'll just call it formative years.
Yeah.
Why is desire, or what does the desire for acceptance look like? How does it play out in the formative years versus your mature years? And we'll just call it mature years. And then so that question's for you, and then we'll pose this to the audience here.
So do you want me to answer the question?
I do, yes. But so let's start with. Oops, sorry. So let's start with the formative years. What does it look like, and then we'll jump to separately.
Well, the idea of acceptance, being accepted, is interesting. I had a conversation about this not too long ago. In raising children, is that we can set expectations, and I think that's the important way to think of things. Is we actually are setting their expectations by how we raise our kids. And so if you're setting your kids to want to expect certain things, then as they get older, they're going to see those certain things as being necessary. They're not going to be things they're going to look at as, optional until they get to their much later years. Because then they will have had enough experience in the world and interacting with other people to begin to work through those things. But if they don't have that interaction, then it's a whole nother thing, because you can live in this bubble of expectation. And I think that the idea of acceptance and expectation are synonymous in what we're talking about tonight, because how you're raised is going to determine a lot of how you view the idea of acceptance. And so it's how you're raised by your parents. And so if you were raised, for example, if you were raised in a family that is very emotional oriented, there's show of affection and love and all that is all very external, based on things that are done, then love, the definition of love will be based on that. It'll be based on the idea of, like, for example, if the expectation is we love you, so we buy you presents, then they're going to expect in their later years of life that, if somebody really cares about them, they're going to give them stuff, and so that's going to become their sense of acceptance, are people giving me things, because if they're not giving me things, then they must not accept me. And so those are kind of run parallel. And so our ideas of, what is acceptance has a lot to do with that. But if you're raised like in a family or like me, where we were raised with the teaching, the understanding that you work for everything that you get, and you be industrious, and you don't be money grubbing, and you're trying to think of some other attributes of my own upbringing, that there's certain behavior that's necessary, and laziness isn't one of them. And so when you have all that, then acceptance becomes, if I show up for work on time, I'll be accepted.
Yeah.
You learn, these are the things you learn. If I'm not constantly focused on money, you know, then or I'm taking care of myself. Is probably a better way of putting it. I'm taking care of myself, then I'll be accepted. And so it sets a whole different precedent for what acceptance is. Based on how you're brought up. So I would say those years you're talking about, the formative years, have a lot to do with how we're raised, as children, and some of that, in certain circumstances where that's not, we're not actually, parents that are working, and you're raised by babysitters or grandparents or something like that. That's still going to apply, but it's going to be different. It's not going to be the same idea. So again, like I said, acceptance is really an attribute of what is how you were raised. And so I think that plays a lot into it. Mm-hmm. The later years is, like I said, it depends on your interaction with others. It's funny. So I wasn't raised as a Christian, and I say a lot, but I've been saved long enough that I have watched people be raised as Christians. And so watching people raised as Christians, one thing that I think it's a negative, most people would say it's a positive, but I think it's a negative, is how little interaction people have growing up with people outside the church. Mm-hmm. Because in many homes it's the world is a bad place. You don't, when you go out there, be really, really careful, because people out there are evil. They're looking to take advantage of you, and then you get out there and you're, I don't know if I should trust these people or not because they're not Christians. And so you have a lot of that kind of thinking that goes on in people's heads. And so they're not interacting with any kind of openness to other people. And so they're not learning anything new. They continue to hang on to their family traditions, and it becomes kind of ingrown. And I've seen people they're in their later years, it's 20s, 30s, their adult years, where they're now starting to raise families, and they're just doing what their parents did, even though they know that what their parents did is wrong, because they have grown up saying, I don't want to raise my kids the way I was raised because I don't think that was the best way of doing it. They end up doing that anyway. Yeah. They just raise them that way anyway because they don't know any other way. There is no other way. They only know this way. And so they refer back to the way that they were raised, even though they didn't like it, and they raise their kids in a way that their kids aren't going to like. And so they just start this cycle. So they don't get that. But all in all, I think the most important thing in talking about all of this is the understanding that none of this has to stay that way. It doesn't have to stay set in concrete. You don't have to stay thinking that this is what acceptance means. Mm-hmm. That can change if you are willing to break out and go beyond. You can discover there is a difference, that acceptance isn't just simply how you were raised.
Yeah. So what is the thing that trying to pose this as a question that doesn't go too far. This is always the trick with these podcasts. What does acceptance look like? What are the efforts for acceptance look like in like we'll just call it like a common setting? What is what are some common things people do for acceptance? It doesn't matter age range.
Well, that's the thing is that idea of common is like, it's so family oriented that it isn't as common. There isn't that commonality anymore. Like when I was younger, we all acted very similar. You know, our we were we hung out in larger groups, you know, much larger groups, because there was a larger group, you know, where people usually are by themselves now because they're not, they don't fit into groups anymore. A lot of that is because of you know, technology and the you know, video games and social media and these kinds of things that keep people from actually building relationships with other people. That plays a big part in it. But at the same time, it's the idea that, you know, families do what families do. Like, if you saw, for example, if you saw a kid being, you know, beaten by his parents, you know, grabbed and, you know, kicked in the butt, or, you know, you know, smacked across the back of the head or something like that, no big deal, because that's what your parents did that as well.
Yeah.
You know, there wasn't this idea, you know, that this was going to be some traumatic experience, you know, and I think anybody who was raised like that, well, let me put it this way, because obviously you can't say anybody, but I would say the vast majority of people that were raised like that didn't have a problem being raised like that, and don't have a problem being raised like that. You know, it's because they realize, you know, it was like, this isn't abuse. You know, this is not abuse. This is, you know, your parents showing their disapproval,
Yeah.
you know, of how you're acting. And doing it publicly was not a big deal. You know, we didn't have all this, you know, shaming and all this kind of stuff. I mean, there's so, you know, we're creating a society now of phobic people, you know, that are just afraid of their own shadow. You know, it's funny, because when I lived in England, that was very true, because there were a lot of what they refer to as council estates, council housing, which is low income stuff, and so you had they're like, you know, we would call them ghettos here, but they're not really, you know, they're fairly common, and so it wasn't like there was, you know, there were some that were worse than others, but that wasn't the idea. But these kids would have all kinds of mental issues, you know, mental problems, you know, anxieties, and checking themselves into the hospital, you know, for periods of time, you know, and you know, you see that happening more and more here. You know, the idea of having a therapist is like common. It's almost like, what, you don't have a therapist? How do you survive life? And so we have all these, you know, mental problems and stuff like that, because we just don't interact with people anymore. And so the idea of common, you know, levels of acceptance are really, you know, they're hard to define now. What would be a common level of acceptance now, because people are not commonly accepting people anymore. You know, there's not this idea of, you know, normal. You know, what's normal, you know, is interesting, you know, to hear people think, well, you know, to say what's normal. You know, I was even in an environment like Christianity, where anybody who knows anything about Christianity knows that there are social norms, you know, biblical social norms, and expect Christians to act like this, but yet many don't, you know, and I think it's all part of that same thing, is they come into the church and they still haven't broke out of that idea of, you know, of the way they were raised, you know, and the things that they see as normal and acceptable when they were raised, and just they kind of bring that in with them in the church, and it stays with them. There's not that understanding that things can be different, you know, that transformation.
So
it's hard to say. So it's hard to answer the questions. What's normal?
Yeah. So let's talk about let's actually define acceptance, and based out of the scripture. But let's get to a couple of the answers. A couple more answers, or a couple answers came in. Again, the question is, what does it mean to be accepted? And hopefully, you know, you guys still have a little bit of time to get some answers in, because this is kind of the second segment of this podcast. But the first one that came in is, and this is a two-part answer actually, it says to convert or change your life to fit or be aligned with the gospel of Christ. Elaborating on my answer, when I chose to accept Jesus into my life, there was a sense of acceptance among the people who knew me and noticed the change in me. It triggered something in them, conviction.
Yes. So I'm processing that thinking. because that's kind of subjective. It's not wrong, but it is subjective. It's probably not everybody's experience. But that idea, is a Christian idea. If you do right, you will be accepted. So a change in behavior. So like you have, particularly in the church, when you have people come in, well, I should just say generally, when people come into the church and they have actually genuinely met Jesus, they begin to change. There's an acceptability because there's an identification there. You have experienced what I have experienced, and so it's not just the change itself. It's the change is a reflection of the encounter or the experience of having met Jesus, and that's the difference. In religious environments, that doesn't happen. In religious environments, you'll have a measure of conformity, that will begin to happen within the group, and that happens in any group. Is there's some measure of conformity where people will begin to conform to certain things. But in a church where people are actually meeting Jesus Christ, they're actually genuinely being saved. The idea of conformity is much more difficult because you can't conform to having a relationship with Jesus without having a relationship with Jesus. And so there's I think a kind of a bigger picture that idea of acceptance becomes a thing. Like in our church, this is something that we contend for in our church, is that there are no hypocrites, that there aren't people who come in and pretend to be one thing, but they're actually another. And so it's not a question of ostracizing. It's a question of that they will never feel that acceptance because they haven't met Jesus yet. They may be coming and they may believe, but they haven't crossed that threshold where it begins to change who they are as a person. And so they'll sense that, sort of anticipation from the church in general. When are you going to change? When are you going to become the thing that people become when they become genuine converts? And so yes, there is that acceptance that happens that way. But it's not just the change of your behavior that makes that acceptance. It's the identification. Because people are not, like when somebody first comes into church, and especially when they first become a Christian, they're not running on all, 16 cylinders. They're still having to work through some of the reality of, coming out of a world where the standards and morals and all those things are very different, and the morals and standards of Christianity are very unique in so many ways. There's an awkwardness, but at the same time that it's that transforming power of Jesus in your life that people can see that and see, okay, God's working in them, so it's not this idea of hitting this, bar of perfection as much as you've become a work in progress. It's quite clear, and not like in a rehabilitation way. It's a transformative way that there's this literal, okay, baseline has changed. I mean, immediately the baseline has changed, but then there's following that baseline. There's the pursuit of perfection. The pursuit of becoming a better Christian, not just simply being a Christian, but being a better Christian. That that begins to cause more change, but the changes are more gradual. So there's that initial sort of radical change, which is, you got saved. We can tell you're radically converted here. Until that's happened, it's kind of like wait and see. Yes, we're here. We're glad you're here, but we want to see, God do something in your life. But then when that doesn't happen, it's like, okay, well, you're here. We're glad you're here, but you're not. You haven't gotten saved. You haven't surrendered your life to Jesus, and so everything from there becomes almost a broken record in many ways. You need to get saved, and I want to do this, and I want to do that, and I want to do the other thing, and we there's a period of time where people come and they see there's things to be involved in, and I'd like to be involved in this, and it's like, no, you can't. You haven't been saved yet. We're glad you're here, we're glad you're coming, but you can't be involved in those things until you get saved.
Yeah.
Until we can see that you've repented of your sin and you've surrendered your life to Jesus, and God's doing a work in your life. And so that's kind of a long way of dealing with that, but I just wanted to kind of clarify that it isn't just simply like becoming a part of a group, or organization,
Yeah.
Where people just kind of slowly conform, and there's lots of room for difference. It's not like that in the kingdom of God. There's a lot of unity that's associated with this, and it's the unity that causes the acceptance, not so much the behavior itself, but the unity as a whole.
Yeah. So second answer here, live and act in a way that is acceptable or approved of by your environment or culture. Hey, have you been chatting with GPT?
Yeah, I know.
You're not allowed to. This is not an open book trivia.
I know. If we want to talk with GPT, we can just bring up a browser and do that. It's not.
Okay. We'll just take that as face value. Totally honest answer here. Live and act in a way that is acceptable or approved of by your environment or culture. Totally, that sounds like a definition.
Yeah,
from the
it's a
dictionary.
definition. That's definitely Google or something.
What does it mean to be accepted? Okay, go ahead.
I don't think we're shifting. Oh, there it goes. Now, all of a sudden.
Now that you turn away, yes.
Yes, I turn away and it works. Yeah. Where were we? Oh, that
live and act in a way that's acceptable.
yeah, that's the obvious. To live and act in a way, but I mean that's true. I mean, obviously that's true. That's that is what acceptance is. That's the definition of acceptance. That has nothing to do with being accepted.
Yeah,
it just has everything to do with how acceptance works, which is important.
Yeah,
that is very, very important to understand, and that's a mature way of thinking about things. Because if you're being mature, then you're okay. Yeah. Sorry if you're not seeing things the way that you need to on the transforms. Something's not happening. But anyway, so because it should be on another scene right now. But anyway, recognizing that you have to change in order to fit in. I think it's something that in this day and age is something that people need to learn. They need to learn this. It's literally something they need to learn. It's not something that they know because it's been ingrained in them. Because there's so many people today that want to try to transform the environment into something acceptable to them, and then they're going to be happy with things being that way. And that's not how acceptability works. If you want to be accepted, then you have to change, and that's the whole point of what God is saying to Cain.
Yeah.
If you do right, you will be accepted. There's a principle there, that's important for us to understand. Is if you do what is acceptable, then you will be accepted. But you have to do what is acceptable to be accepted.
No GPT, I promise.
Ah, okay.
Perplexity then?
So,
Let's keep going down the line here. I'm totally kidding, by the way. I know this individual knows I'm kidding. Okay, so here's another answer. You are given access. It's an interesting one.
You are given access. Yeah, that's kind of vague. There's a truth in that, but that it is kind of vague, a vague description of acceptance. But yeah, there is a. I would say you are. Yeah. You are given access. Is correct. It's a right way of saying it. Because you would be filling it in with what access to what. But that is the truth, is that it's access to something that you didn't have access to before. And that's a very important, probably, generalization of acceptance that's important for us to understand, is that there's access, like in the case of Cain, the idea was access to God himself. You will be accepted. You will have access to me. You will be approved.
Yeah.
And so you will, if you will do right, then you will have access. And so there is a truth in that. And that kind of goes back to the thing I was beginning to say before, is that I've seen over the years, people come into the church, they don't want to They don't want to be obedient to God. They want to be able to be them and have their own beliefs that and still be accepted. And they can be in the church for years like that, and they get mad and leave the church because they're not accepted for being what they're not supposed to be. And so that's the idea of acceptance. The understanding is that there's a certain, this is true of all of life. This isn't true just in the church. This is true of all of life. You have to act a certain way on your job. You have to act a certain way in your family. There are certain ways to act, and again, I can't define what those certain ways are because they're different with different families and different with different jobs. But there is a way to act that is acceptable. And if you're not willing to do
it's
that,
just going to be a very dynamic learning curve for
Yeah.
every individual as you go.
but you
through
need to
life.
understand the basic. That's what I'm talking about. The general understanding that access, acceptance, all of those kinds of things only come when you read the room. Basically,
you know
you
what
read
the
the room
standard is.
and you comply.
Yeah.
Otherwise you're fighting against the very thing that you're trying to achieve.
So there's a part of this story, and I didn't read the whole story for time's sake, but part of the story that I think is relevant to the conversation is that what Cain did instead of adjusting
Yeah.
to the room is he just killed the competition.
Right.
And so
Not even just competition.
I'm using that word,
Yeah.
flippantly, but he just, I'm not going to change. I'm going to just
Yeah.
take out my
Yeah, I think-
frustrations on this person. If you
Yeah.
think about it, it's kind of still exists today. That same way.
Well,
of seeing
yeah, but
life.
I think Cain's response to Abel was just jealousy. He wasn't trying to change the environment.
Right.
And that's the point that I'm making about the idea of killing the competition, is that Abel wasn't the one who'd set the environment, God was.
Yeah.
And Abel had just complied where Cain didn't.
Yeah.
And so killing Abel wouldn't change the environment.
Yeah.
This was just sheer jealousy and him not wanting to be constantly compared in his own mind, with Abel, the good boy. But yeah, so yeah, just an unwillingness to comply, and then everything went from there. And this is an interesting thing because it's a very common response that people have when they don't like something is they remain the same as they are. And that's the worst decision that you can make in life, is if you are trying to change something, remaining the same doesn't change anything. I mean, that sounds like that should just be a given. You should just know if you keep doing the same thing, then things aren't going to change. But for some reason in our thinking, we don't do that. We don't go there. We don't. It's like, I am me, and this is the way I am, and this environment needs it to change. And it's like, but the environment's not going to change because you're not going to change. And so there's no room for anything to change. Especially, if you're coming in from underneath. You're not the one establishing this. Then if you're the one establishing it, well, then you don't have to worry about it. You can create your own environment. And then other people have to comply to that. But always somebody somewhere who comes into that environment is going to have to change in order to be a part of that environment, except for the one who created the environment in the first place. So I think it's important for us, that's what I'm saying, in a general understanding, is to understand you're not going to come in and change the environment.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think is interesting, that over the years, especially working with young guys and trying to teach them how to be industrious, it's probably one of the most difficult lessons to be able to teach them, is you don't change your environment, you change you to comply with your environment so that you can affect change. If you're going to have impact and influence, then you have to get into the environment, become part of the environment, become a leader in that environment, and then you are in a position to where you can bring change to that environment. But you aren't going to just walk in and complain and gripe, and then all of a sudden you're going to have the ability to influence or impact the environment. They'll just kick you. The environment will kick you out.
Yeah. So, thinking about this scripture and what, because God uses this word and it's recorded for us, And the word obviously has a very specific definition, but the word accepted in this scripture means elevation, exaltation, dignity. It actually literally means to swell or uprise.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, so that idea of access.
yeah, exactly. So it's like there's obviously something very specific God's talking about that Cain didn't do. So take me through this, from the standpoint of what it means to be accepted by God now.
Well, this is the funny thing about kind of tying back into everything that we just said. There is no real reference for what is accepted, and so therefore most people that come into Christianity, initially anyway, come in with the idea that acceptance is if God treats me the way that I want to be treated.
Yeah.
Which isn't. That you find out very quickly that that's not how it works. God doesn't treat you the way you need to be treated. He treats you the way that he thinks you need to be treated. And so because he's trying to make something out of our lives, it's like I said, working with young guys and trying to teach them how to be responsible. They've been on drugs, they've been partying, they've been doing this and that and the other thing. They've been in and out of jobs, for years of their lives. And now they want to make something of themselves. And that's usually the first lesson that they need to learn, and or I should say, probably it's not the first lesson that they should learn. It is the first lesson they should learn, but it isn't the first lesson they do learn. And it's funny because I want to be able to be influential. Okay, well, if you want to learn to be influential, what does it mean to be influential? Well, getting people to listen to what I'm saying and want to follow that, which means they're going to change. Well, do you know how to change? Well, no. Well, then how are you going to be influential to get other people to want to change if you don't even know how to change yourself? Mm-hmm. And they don't see the merit in that. That's the real problem, is they don't see the merit in that. The idea that if you can learn how to change yourself, then you can learn how to change the world. But if you can't change yourself, then you'll never change the world. Not only will you never change the world, you probably won't change anything. Your life will be 20, 30, 50, 80, and nothing. There'll be no change. There'll be no difference. You'll just be a 30-year-old version of yourself, a 50-year-old version of yourself, an 80-year-old version of yourself when you were 15, because you're not growing, you're not maturing, because you don't know how to change, and so you're not going to ever be able to find that ability to have influence with your life. And you're not going to find acceptability, because of the way that you're living your life. It's interesting to me to watch over the years of people they refuse to change, and so the world in general stops inviting them to things. When they're younger, they've got all kinds of friends. They know people here and there and everywhere. They're going this way and that way and doing this. But as they move out and they start to, start really trying to live life, and they haven't really matured in their thinking to being willing to change and adapt to environments and stuff like that, they're invited to things less and less. They're given less and less opportunities. They're having to take entry-level jobs, at 40 years old. Because they're the only kind of jobs that people like that can work at, and so jobs with genuine responsibility, which includes pay increase and all those kinds of things that go with responsibility, they don't qualify for those things because they simply don't know how to work with other people. It's interesting to me, the phrase that is very, I don't know if it still is, but had been, I'd say peaked, 5 years ago maybe, was the idea of being a good fit for a job. That was the criteria. Are you a good fit? So it wasn't, do you have the skill set? Do you have the knowledge base? Those kinds of things. It was, will you fit here? Will you be able to, if we drop you in this environment, are you going to become one of the moving parts of that environment? Or are we constantly going to be having to work around you on everything? Yeah. And so you're not a good fit. And I was thinking about that the other day. There's sometimes that people that they come to church, they believe the same things, but they're not a good fit, because they have their own way of doing things, and so they're not a good fit to be involved in the functionings of the church, because they're incapable of being able to comply to the environment, and so they're not able to find that place of acceptance. How come people don't invite me to this? How come I'm not asked to do this? How come I'm not involved in this? How come all these how comes? And the reason is because they are wanting a position, they're demanding a position that they don't qualify for, and they don't have any intentions of qualifying for. They just think it should be fair that they're involved, and that they're accepted. It's fair to accept me. It doesn't matter what I do or how I live. It's fair. You should accept me because it's fair. It's right and it's fair for you to accept me. Not if you're unacceptable. Not if you have chosen to live in an unacceptable manner. Then why is it the responsibility of the environment to accept you when you have made your clear choice? You don't want to be accepted by the environment. You just want them to accept you. You demand their acceptance in terms of your involvement, but you're unwilling to comply with the environment. It doesn't make any sense.
So, a quick question: is it right to want to be accepted?
Yes, absolutely.
That's
you
a
should
good
want
desire,
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should want to be accepted, but it shouldn't be out of some lack of self-esteem or feeling that the world is doing you a disservice. It should be with the idea of, I want to be accepted. So, like I said, you're reading the room. What are the requirements here? What are the obligations here? And what do I need to do? So like coming into church, you come into church and you want to sleep with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Well, sorry, no. Oh, that's not fair. Religion should be free. Religion, you have nonprofit status. I've heard these kinds of things. You have nonprofit status, with the American government. So therefore you should allow all the public to come in, no matter who they are. And it's like, what kind of logic is that? Okay, well, all right. Hey, listen, I know you got kids, but hey, we have to let these pedophiles come to church.
Yeah.
Because they have to be accepted. Everybody has to be accepted. So I'm sorry if they abuse your children or they catch one of your children outside and take off. I'm sorry, but fair's fair. That doesn't fly very well when you're talking about that kind of thing. And so why should it be that in any other way either? Because we do have standards. There are standards of acceptability and behavioral standards of acceptability, issues of compliance, these kinds of things that are very much the reason why we are able to keep pedophiles out of church. When you have standards about morality, then you don't have to worry about that kind of thing. The church can be a safe place, but not for unsafe people. It can't be a safe place for unsafe people.
Yeah.
Unsafe people have to stay out in order for it to be a safe place. And so you can't just make, that the idea, I don't know if this is still going on or not, but this idea of safe spaces in universities, they're not safe spaces by any stretch of the imagination.
Huh.
There's nothing safe about them. You go in there and you're, it's like you're in prison. You can't do anything in these places because we want to make this a safe environment. And there's nothing safe about that. It's prison. That would be like calling, San Quentin a safe place. I'm going to go live in San Quentin because that's a safe place. No, you have to have standards, and those standards have to be something that are bring people into a measure of acceptance, not always questioning everybody's acceptance.
So, what is the issue with, what is it in human nature that wants the environment to change versus changing to fit the environment?
Pride. It's just pride. We're just selfish, prideful people. So one of the things I'm working on, well, I finished it already, but the sermon I'm going to be preaching tomorrow, this is one of those things that is so critical for us to understand, is that there is an issue of compliance, when it comes to being a Christian. But you have to personalize this. This has to be something that you personalize. It can't just be rule keeping. You have to learn to comply voluntarily and want to. So there's so many levels to that.
So what do you think is like what is the standard of acceptance for, when it comes to being accepted by God? What is the standard of acceptance? What is the do right? If you do right, or if
okay.
yeah. What is when it comes to God?
Yeah, do right. Right with a capital R. That has to be, what God says is right.
Yeah.
Not what we think is right. Again, it all comes back to this idea of an external standard, not something that comes from us. If you're going to be successful in life, genuinely successful in life, you're going to have to abandon this idea that you know anything that other people should know. If you live your life with the idea of I know things that other people should know, and if people would just listen to me, then they would be able to, the world would, I've mentioned this before, but I have a friend of mine who says, if people would just listen to me, then the world would be a better place to live. And no, it's not that the world would be a better place to live. Just the world would be like how you are. It wouldn't be necessarily a better place to live. It would just be how you are. And he said that tongue in cheek. He was just joking and saying that. But it is genuinely how people believe, is that the idea is that what's going on in their mind, if everybody had this going on in their mind, then everybody would benefit. And it's like, no, this is not true, because you are only talking from the standpoint of you benefiting. You're not talking from the standpoint of everybody benefiting. So it's like, as long as I'm benefiting, well, somehow you must be benefiting, because I'm benefiting. If life's good for me, then it must be good for you. That's a 3-year-old mentality. That if I'm happy, everybody must be. And if I'm miserable, everybody must be miserable. That's a mentality of a 3-year-old. But hopefully you will get past 3 years old and begin to understand that you being happy or unhappy doesn't necessarily have any reflection on what's going out in reality, in the real world. You may just simply be in the wrong mind frame, and more than likely that is the case, is that you are in the wrong mind frame. But when you think about it from the standpoint of acceptance, and especially, this is one of those areas where being a Christian is such a benefit, because you're learning this stuff directly from the Word of God, and it's telling you how you're supposed to be and what compliance looks like and all these kinds of things. And then and you have to do it. You have to. It's not an option. You have to do it. Not in a rules and regulations way. It's in my famous 2x4 way, is that if you aren't going to comply with God's way, then plan on having knots in your head. Because life's just going to beat you up left and right. You're never going to get anywhere.
That's why I have a funny shaped head. That's my profile is so horrible. In the back of the head
from being clubbed. But this is the thing that we need to learn is that life works a certain way. There's a certain way. Life demands our compliance. It's when you get caught in a riptide, for example, the riptide, if you want to survive, it demands your compliance. If you fight the riptide, chances are you're going to die. Not because you have no choice. Oh, I got caught in a riptide, there's no hope for me, I'm going to die. No, but because you were refusing, even if it was in a panic, you're refusing to comply with the tide. You're going to go against the tide, you're going to fight against it, and it's much stronger than you. You have no ability to fight against a riptide. And so you fight against a riptide, you're done. But what they always tell you about riptide, don't fight against it. Just go with it. Just roll with it. Let it take you where it's going to take you. It's going to take you out in the middle of the ocean. You're going to be alive in the middle of the ocean, and maybe you'll get rescued. But if you fight against this, you're going to be dead close to the shore. Yeah. So it's up to you. You decide how this is going to be. You're going to be alive in the middle of the ocean and may or may not get back to shore, or you're going to be dead, close to the shore. And either way, you're not going to get, you're not going to get back to the shore easy. But at least one way is possible. And life's like that, and if you're going to fight against it, you're going to just suffer the consequences of it.
Let's talk about the mindset and I've totally fallen in this trap before, and I've worked with and talked to a lot of people that I can honestly say quite a few people who, in one way or another, look at other people's situations. We talk about this issue of jealousy with Cain and Abel, and they look at their situation, and then when you try to help them through their situation by using either yourself or somebody else as an example of how they got through something similar.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but it was different for them.
Yeah, it always is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it always is. In our head, it's always different.
Yeah.
This is one of the things, like I said, I'm talking about here is the idea. When you're living out, I have a bunch of these little phrases that I've kind of learned over the years, and one of them is, when you rely on the library of heaven that you believe is somehow lodged in your brain, you're a foolish person. You're just a foolish person, because there's about as much knowledge up there as there is space. Okay, I mean, let's just face the facts. This is a very tiny space that's up inside of your head, and there's not a lot in there, compared to what's available. And so your take on things, my take on things, not just yours, but my take, everybody's take on things, is very, 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 very limited. And it's limited by our experience. It's limited by our age. You think, oh, what do you mean? I'm 62 years old. I've been around for a long time. Well, compared to an infant, yes, but that's not much of a comparison. Compared to God, no. An infant is a better comparison to God, or is just as good of a comparison to God. It's not. There's no comparison that way. And the way the world was designed, the way God created life, the principles that God has established for how life works, all of those things we're learning little by little by little. And by the time that we die, we will have probably learned, maybe 3% of what there is to understand about life. Because we're not, there's just too much, there's just too much to life, and how life works to comprehend all of that. That's why obedience is so critical. Learning to comply is so critical, because learning to comply is the shortcut to gaining all the knowledge of the universe. Mm-hmm. Okay, because you don't need all the knowledge of the universe, because if you're complying, then you can see, okay, well, I'm complying, and then you're at a place where, okay, well, I could tweak this, or I could tweak that, or I could tweak the other thing. But when you just decided, no, this is the way things have got to be, or I'm not gonna play. Well, you're not gonna play then. You're gonna sit on the side.
So in the context of Cain and Abel, well, Cain specifically, but like just thinking about the whole scenario now, God's come and told Cain, which is, another interesting part is that God actually kind of, tosses him a bone. He's like, hey, you're not on your own here. If you do well here, so he lays out the instructions, he gives the definition. There's an expectation. If you do well, you'll be accepted. But what should have Cain done different after that? Like what would have been
comply.
Right,
I mean, that's
but applying that to now, what would have been some practical things that Cain could have done to sit down and just go okay, what am I going to do next?
Well, he saw that, Abel brought his first and his best, and he was accepted, so I would bring my first and my best.
So learning from other people who've been accepted.
Yeah, just like I said, being able to read the room.
Yeah.
You're why fight against this kind of stuff? It's like, just because you didn't think of it first, so you're not going to do it.
Yeah, this goes back to that pride thing again. So not being able to.
Yeah, if I didn't come up with the idea, it's not a good idea. It's like,
Yeah. So what is the right mindset? So now you're talking about reading the room, but what is the right mindset to have when it comes to being accepted in general? Moving forward, I want to be accepted everywhere I go. I want to have this edge. Obviously, some folks you probably don't want to be accepted by, but being able to actually have that edge wherever you go.
Well, the truth is I know for me as a Christian, I want to have access to every person's life. Mm-hmm. So I want to be accepted, and so I try. I'm that's a I think a valuable tool to have is when you are, in an environment that you're not comfortable with. How can you comply? What does compliance look like in that environment?
Mhm.
And learning how to comply so that you can be a part of that environment and thereby be able to have influence, in that environment. So even if the environment, because that's, I mean, especially as a Christian, that's, we're, that's God's favorite people. God's favorite people are the ones that are out of compliance with the world. Because when they come into compliance with Him, they don't need to be in compliance with the world. It's not, and great. I remember, as a newer believer in Jesus, I realized, hey, I get to be a rebel legally. This is legal rebellion. I can rebel against the world, because I'm complying with Christ. So I don't have to bow down to the things that other people are bowing down to in the world. I don't have to, work, 16 hours a day, to get, money so that I can be happy. It's not a requirement. I don't have to do that. In fact, I don't have to, how to describe it. It's not so much that I don't have to work at all, but that I don't have to work as a slave. I don't have to work at a slave pace in order to be able to comply with God. In being industrious is not necessarily being a slave. And so, for me, it's like, I can be doing things and enjoying life. I can have, which I have, over the years of being saved, I've had jobs that I love. I love the job. They're not high demand jobs. I get off at 5 o'clock. I go home. I spend, some time with my wife, with the kids, go to church. I'm involved in things in church. And so, work was a very small part of my life, for many, many years. It wasn't a significant part of my life. It was what I did, but it wasn't significant. And then out of that, I realized that there was a whole nother way of living, that didn't revolve around money and things, and being able to, go to church and serve God and do the will of God with my life. There's a lot of things that you can do that don't cost money that are enjoyable,
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Well, that's actually the end of my questions. So we'll stop there. We are 3 minutes early, which is rare, actually. But we will be here again next week. I will be here again next week. I actually am not totally sure what I'm going to do next week, but I think I'm going to conclude this series with one more on resolving identity crisis, and we'll talk maybe through some more practical things. But I do encourage you to join us next week again, or join me again next week. Pastor Ford will be out of town, and then we will also be here tomorrow night for our midweek service. As always, we invite you to join that if you're in the local Bay Area, especially on the peninsula, and you can make it out. We're going to put some information on the screen here, service times, and again, that's in person, and the address will also be on that info in just a second. But appreciate you joining tonight, appreciate the comments, and look forward to being here again next week.